All right, I think we're ready to get started this evening, and let's begin by going to the Lord in a word of prayer. Father in heaven, I pray that what we talk about this evening will be edifying and help people to connect and make the connections they need to in a prophecy so they can be more firmly rooted in your faith. It's in Christ's name I pray, amen. All right, this will be the fifth week that we're looking at the Millennial Psalms. I'm going to take my watch off. I got mosquito bite on my arm. The fifth week that we're in the Millennial Psalms. And what these Psalms are is they are Psalms which are set in the context of the earthly reign of Christ. And we've been going through these, and today we're going to be in the second half of Psalms chapter 46, starting in verse 5. Last week we ended in Psalms 46:4, and that was a discussion of the river of life that's in the midst of the earthly kingdom during the time of the millennium. So we're going to start on a new verse today, Psalms chapter 46 and verse 5, and it reads, God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. God shall help her just at the break of dawn. Okay. The first half of this verse speaks of the permanency of the land of Israel during the millennial reign of Christ. Israel shall never again be displaced from her land. We can see the same promise concerning the permanency of Israel in the book of Joel. The context in which this occurs as a result of the battle of Armageddon between the Lord and the nations seeking to displace Israel from the land of promise. Look at Joel chapter 3 and verse 12. Joel 3:12. Let the nations be wakened and come up to the valley of Jehoshaphat, for there I shall sit to judge all the surrounding nations, or the nations surrounding, right? Put in the sickle, for the harvest is ripe. Come, go down, for the winepress is full. The vats overflow, for their wickedness is great. Multitudes in the valley of decision, for the day of the Lord is near in the valley of decision. The sun and moon will grow dark, the stars will diminish their brightness. The Lord will also roar from Zion and utter his voice from Jerusalem. The heavens and earth will shake, but the Lord will be a shelter for his people and the strength for the children of Israel. You shall know that I am the Lord your God, dwelling in Mount Zion. Then Jerusalem shall be holy, and no alien shall ever pass through her again. So the second half of Psalms chapter 46 and verse 5 speaks of the initial intervention of the Lord, which really marks the beginning of the millennial kingdom. Let's look at it again. Let's scroll back there. Let me turn back in my page and read this second half. God shall help her just at the break of dawn. Now, the dawn here is not talking about morning hours. It's the dawning of the millennium. I mean, the millennial kingdom begins with the battle of Armageddon. Right? When the Lord comes and the battles of the Great Tribulation are getting more and more heated and violent, and just then the Lord interrupts it. He comes down and he cleans the clock of all those who have come up against Jerusalem. And that's when the millennium actually starts, at the dawn. That's the dawn of the millennium, right? So, and we've already seen this, but we're going to look at this verse again. Joel chapter 3, verse 16. The Lord will roar from Zion and utter his voice from Jerusalem. The heavens and earth will shake, but the Lord will be a shelter for his people and the strength of the children of Israel. Let's continue reading now in Psalms 46 and verse 6. Of course, this is another millennial psalm we're looking at here. The nations raged. See, that's what's going on during the Great Tribulation. The nations raged. The kingdoms were moved. He, that is God, uttered his voice, and the earth melted. Once again, this is a description of the battle of Armageddon, which ends the Great Tribulation and begins the day of wrath, which brings in the millennial reign of Christ. By the way, we see this same transition between the Great Tribulation and the millennial reign of Christ mentioned in the book of Revelation. Look at Revelation chapter 11 and verse 16. Revelation 11:16. My glasses are dirty, and they're driving me nuts. So we turn to Revelation chapter 11 and verse 16 while I'm getting this glass cleaner thingy out. All right, see if I can read it without my glasses. Yeah, kind of. And the 24 elders who sat before God on their thrones fell on their faces and worshiped God, saying, "We give you thanks, O Lord Almighty, the one who is and who was and is to come, because you have taken your great power and reign." Now listen to this verse here, verse 18. Very important verse here in Revelation chapter 11. Verse 16. "The nations were angry, and your wrath has come." That is the demarcation point between the Great Tribulation and the time of God's wrath. The nations were angry. They're coming after Israel. And your wrath has come. In other words, the wrath cuts this all short. Right? "In the time of the dead that they should be judged, and that you should reward your servants and the prophets and the saints, and those who fear your name, small and great, and should destroy those who destroy the earth." A little more. I want to use this thing before it dries up. The time of the persecution of Israel from the angry nations of the world ends with the Battle of Armageddon, which also begins the time of God's wrath, during which he annihilates the armies of the wicked nations and conquers the rest of the world, which remains after that terrible battle. Let's also look in Isaiah chapter 13, verse 3. And what we're doing here, really, what we're doing here is we're looking at these millennial psalms, and then we're looking at other prophecies in the Bible, which you see this is what's going to happen in the end times, and this is what we are seeing in these psalms. That's why we know they're millennial psalms, right? So Isaiah chapter 13 and verse 3. "I have commanded my sanctified ones. I have called my mighty ones for my anger, those who rejoice in my exaltation." That's probably the angels, by the way. "The noise of a multitude in the mountains, like that of many people, a tumultuous noise of the kingdom of nations gathered together. The Lord of hosts musters the army for battle. They come from a far country, from the ends of heaven, the Lord in his weapons of indignation, to destroy the whole land. Wail, for the day of the Lord is at hand. It will come as a destruction from the Almighty. Therefore all hands will be limp. Every man's heart will melt, and they'll be afraid. Pangs and sorrows will hold on them, and there will be pain as a woman in childbirth. They will be amazed at one another. Their faces shall be like flames. Behold, the day of the Lord comes, cruel, with both wrath and fierce anger, to lay the land desolate, and he will destroy its sinners from it. For the stars of the heavens and their constellations will not give their light, and the sun will be darkened from its going forth, and the moon will not cause its light to shine. And I'll punish the world for its evil and the wicked for their iniquity, and I'll halt the arrogance of the proud, and will lay low the haughtiness of the terrible. I will make a mortal more rare than fine gold, a man more than the golden wedge of Ophir." All right, let's continue reading now. This what we're reading about here is the time of God's wrath, right? Zechariah chapter 14 and verse 12. Once again, this is God's wrath that initiates the earthly reign of Christ. "And it shall come, and it shall be," and this, let me read it again, Zechariah 14:12. Zechariah 14:12, "And this shall be the plague with which the Lord will strike all the people who fought against Jerusalem. Their flesh shall dissolve while they stand on their feet. and their eyes shall dissolve in their sockets, and their tongue shall dissolve in their mouths. Right? Skip down to verse 14. Judah also will fight at Jerusalem, and the wealth of the surrounding nations shall be gathered together, gold, silver, and apparel in great abundance. Right? So the Lord's going to clean their clocks, and they're going to take spoils. Right? So let's continue reading now in Psalms chapter 46 and verse 7. The Lord of hosts is with us, the God of Jacob our refuge. Salah. Now, the phrase Lord of hosts literally means the Lord of the armies. And certain the inception of the millennial reign of Christ will begin with a battle of never before seen proportions. Of course, the armies of which this speaks of are the armies of angels, right? They're the warrior angels that will be working with the Lord and battling beside the Lord at this time. Back to Psalms 46:7. And by the way, this will be the initial introduction of some of the Israelites to the Lord. When he shows up at the inception of the Battle of Armageddon to defend his people and nation. So in surprise they will say, the Lord of the armies is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. By the way, the word Salah in this passage means to pause and consider. Think about it. Right? Pause and consider. That's what Salah means. All right, let's continue reading. Psalms 46:8. Come, behold the works of the Lord, who has made desolations in the earth. He's made desolation. What's that mean? That means he's flattened all these nations, flattened all these armies that came up against Israel. They're gone. Where they were encamped, it's desolate. Once again, this is an invitation to the Jewish saints of God after the day of God's wrath to come out and view what he has done to the surrounding nations who came up to battle against Israel. Look at Joel chapter 3:19 again. Egypt shall be a desolation, and Edom a desolate wilderness, because of violence against the people of Judah, for they have shed innocent blood in their land. But Judah shall abide forever, and Jerusalem from generation from generation. Right? And by the way, this is one of the reasons that I'm a Zionist, right? Because in this day, you do not want to be on the wrong side of Israel. They are God's people. Right? And I don't care if sometimes they're disobedient. You do not want to be on the wrong side of God's people when God is interceding for them again. Right? All right, let's continue now. See where I left off? 9. Huh? 9. Why no? I mean, did I read Joel 3:19? Okay, I read that. Zechariah 14:12. And this shall be the plague with which the Lord will strike the people who fought against Jerusalem. Their flesh shall dissolve while they stand on their feet, and their eyes shall dissolve in their sockets. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Raiders of the Lost Ark, but this is undoubtedly where they got that scene, right? And their tongues shall dissolve in their mouths. It shall come to pass in that day that a great panic from the Lord will be amongst them. Everyone will seize the hand of his neighbor and raise his hand against his neighbor's hand. Judah will also fight at Jerusalem, and the wealth of the surrounding nations shall be gathered together, gold, silver, and apparel in great abundance. Such also shall be the plague on the horse and the mule, on the camels and the donkey, and on the cattle that will be in those camps. So shall this plague be. And it shall come to pass that everyone who's left of all the nations who came up against Jerusalem shall go up from year to year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, and keep the Feast of the Tabernacles. In other words, all these nations that came up against Israel, those armies are going to be all annihilated. And who's ever left in those nations will have to come up year after year, keep the Feast of the Tabernacles, get their marching orders, and do them. And if they don't, on those nations there shall be no rain. That's what the context teaches us. So let's continue reading now in Psalms chapter 46 and verse 9. He makes war cease to the ends of the earth. He breaks the bow and cuts the spear in two. He burns the chariots in the fire. Right? So what the Lord's going to do when he establishes his kingdom is he's going to destroy all the other nations of the world's ability to make war. So he's the only one with the weapons, right? Let's read now Micah chapter 4 and verse 1. Micah 4:1. Now it shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established on the top of the mountains. It shall be exalted above the hills, and people shall flow to it. Many nations shall come and say, Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways, and we shall walk in his paths. For out of Zion the law shall go forth, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He shall judge between many peoples, and rebuke strong nations afar off. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. Right? See also Isaiah chapter 2 for just about the same quote. I mean, that same quote that we just read in Micah is also in Psalms chapter, or rather, Isaiah chapter 2. And we're not going to repeat it again here. But anyway, Psalms chapter 46:10. We're continuing to look through this millennial Psalms chapter 46. And we're seeing all the characteristics of the millennial kingdom also in this psalm. Psalms 46:10. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted amongst the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. Once again, we can see from this context that Israel shall be the leading legislative, judicial, and executive government of the world. All right, let's continue reading now in Isaiah 2:3. I guess we're going to read some of this verse anyway. Isaiah 2:3. Many people shall come and say, Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways, and we shall walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He shall judge between nations and rebuke many people. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn or study war anymore. Right? So we can see in this context that Israel will be the legislative and judicial and executive body of government for the whole world. By the way, an additional interesting observation about this passage we've just quoted in Isaiah that is virtually identical to Micah chapter 4, 2 and 3. And now Micah and Isaiah were contemporary prophets, so one can only speculate that the Lord inspired them to both pen almost identically the same verses. Right? But notice that the Lord's reign will be one which rebukes nations afar off. He will make them abandon their instruments of war and he will become the all-powerful ruler of the world. Right? So everybody, finally, Psalms chapter 46:11, the last verse in this psalm. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. Salah. So in this verse, we see this psalm concluding with the same thought that it began with. And then the psalmist tells us to pause and consider just how the Lord will be very present in the age to come. All right. So let's look at the next millennial psalm now, Psalms 47. Psalms 47, the very next psalm. And let's read it. Psalms 47. To the chief musician, a psalm of the sons of Korah. Oh, clap your hands, all you peoples. Shout to God with the voice of triumph. For the For the Lord's Most High is awesome. He is a great king over all the earth. He will subdue the peoples under us and the nations under our feet. He will choose our inheritance for us, the excellence of Jacob, whom he loves. Salah. God has gone up with a shout, the Lord with the sound of the trumpet. Sing praises to God, sing praises to our King, sing praises, for God is the King of all the earth. Sing praises with understanding. God reigns over the nations. God sits on his holy throne. The prince of the people have gathered together, the people of the God of Abraham, for the shields of the earth belong to God. He is greatly exalted. Right? So once again, this psalm is a psalm which rejoices in the military victory which God has achieved, which has resulted in the Lord sitting on his throne, ruling over the nations of the world. Once again, this is a millennial psalm because it anticipates the earthly reign of Christ, which will follow the battle of Armageddon, a reign which will be everlasting. Right? Well, at least for 1,000 years anyway, for the Jews, and then we go into the eternal state, right? So anyway, shout with the voice of triumph. Triumph speaks of victory in battle. And certainly the transition between the Great Tribulation and the Millennial Kingdom is a stunning defeat of the nations which came up against Jerusalem. And once again, we can look at Zechariah chapter 14 and verse 12. Here's the stunning defeat. And this shall be the plague with which the Lord will strike all the peoples who fought against Jerusalem. Their flesh shall dissolve while they stand on their feet, and their eyes shall dissolve in their sockets, and their tongues shall dissolve in their mouths. Okay, so what makes this psalm stick out as a unique millennial psalm is primarily three things. The nations of the world have never been subdued under the authority of the Israelites before. So this psalm cannot be talking about a reality which existed during the time of David, but it must be a reality which will exist in the age to come. Right? Look at Psalms chapter 47 and verse 4 now. He will choose our inheritance for us, the excellence of Jacob, whom he loves. Salah. Right? And we can cross-reference this once again with Zechariah chapter 2 and verse 12. And the Lord will take possession of Judah as his inheritance in the Holy Land. He will again choose Jerusalem. Now, Judah and Jerusalem is where Mount Zion is. Right? So Judah is going to be the home of Mount Zion, and that is the place where the Lord will choose to establish his governance over the world. When the Scriptures talks about the Lord choosing Jerusalem, it means that Jerusalem is going to be the elect city of God through whom God is going to funnel all of his earthly activities. So let's continue reading now in Psalms chapter 47 in verse 5. Right? God has gone up with a shout, the Lord with the sound of the trumpet. Now the words gone up in this context can and probably do speak of him ascending to his throne, ascending with the sound of a trumpet. The trumpet of which this verse speaks is probably the battle trumpet which sounded to assemble the people for battle. So basically this verse is saying that the Lord will ascend to his throne as the result of a military victory. After the victory, the Lord will assemble together those who will be assisting him in ruling the world that he has just conquered. Let's continue reading in Psalms chapter 47, verse 6. Sing praises to God. Sing praises to our King. Sing praises. For God is the King over all the earth. See, he's going to be the King over all the earth now. Sing praises with understanding. God reigns over the nations. God sits on his holy throne. That's how we know this is a millennial psalm. Because we have God in Judah, on top of Mount Zion, on his throne, reigning all the conquered nations of the world. That hasn't happened. I mean, you can try to allegorize and spiritualize this all you want, but it is always best to try to interpret prophecy as literally as possible, unless there's some obvious reason why you shouldn't be doing it. But these are all prophecies that are going to be fulfilled during the earthly reign of Christ. Let's continue looking now in Isaiah chapter 47 and verse 6. Oh, we're still there. Okay. Psalms 47, 6. Sing praises to God. Sing praises. No, I've already read that. All right, well, let's move ahead here. Psalms 47, 9. Yeah. The princes of the people have gathered together, the people of the God of Abraham, for the shields of earth belong to God. He is greatly exalted. In other words, the only war-related implements anymore on earth belong to God. Everybody else's implements have been beaten into plowshares and pruning hooks. And their weapons of war have been converted to practical use. The princes of the peoples have gathered together. Now, those princes there are most likely the leadership of Israel, including the apostles, right? And we know that because in Matthew chapter 19 and verse 28, we see this promise. So the Lord said to them, assuredly, and he's talking to his apostles now who followed him, Matthew 19 and verse 28. So the Lord said to them, assuredly I say to you that in the regeneration, that's the kingdom, the regeneration is a reference to the regenerating of the land of promise, so it's the Garden of Eden. And in that regeneration, when the Son of Man sits on the throne of his glory, you, that is the apostles, who have followed me, will also sit on 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. And we can see this promise also in Luke chapter 22 and verse 30, that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom and sit on thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. Those are promises made to the apostles. Right? And God's going to fulfill his promise. By the way, this is not to say that the apostles will be the only 12 who occupy the thrones in the kingdom, but we certainly know there will be at least 12, right? David apparently will also be on that throne, as we can see in Ezekiel chapter 37 and verse 25. David will also be one of those leaders who will be helping the Lord call the shots. Ezekiel 37:25. Then they shall dwell in the land that I have given to Jacob my servant, where your fathers dwelt, and they shall dwell there, they and their children and their children's children forever, and my servant David shall be their prince forever. All right? So David's going to have a part of that leadership as well. All right? Let's continue reading now in Psalms chapter 47, verse 9. The prince of the people have gathered together, and the people of the God of Abraham, for the shields of the earth belong to God, and he is greatly exalted. The shields of the earth belong to the Lord. In other words, the Lord has removed from the rest of the earth the capacity to engage in war. As we once again can see in Micah chapter 4 and verse 3, he shall judge between many peoples and rebuke strong nations afar off. And let's hope that America is one of those strong nations afar off that he's going to rebuke. No more war. They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. Right? So that's another millennial psalm. and we'll end up here today. And I don't know how much longer we're going to do this. I'll probably do at least another week. But hopefully by now, what you're seeing is the pattern in these millennial psalms, which obviously are fulfillment of prophecies, because we can look in the book of Isaiah, the book of Joel, the book of Ezekiel, the book of Micah, the book of Zechariah, all these other prophets, and see the characteristics of the kingdom all contained in these millennial psalms, and that's how we know that they're millennial psalms. All right, well, with that, let's close, and let's close in a word of prayer. Father in heaven, I'm grateful for this time that we can continue to look into these millennial psalms. Father, I pray that those who are serious about your word will categorize these truths into their soul so they can draw strength from that truth which resides in their soul. Dismiss us with your blessing this evening. It's in Christ's name I pray, amen.